In the name of the living God, the Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer.
Amen.
He opened their minds to understand the scriptures. So in this Luke's version of one of the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus, we have the disciples gathered on the very day of the resurrection, late in the day, based on what goes before in Luke's account. And they're talking together about the reports of the resurrection that they have heard, sharing the news with each other. And then Jesus appears. And much like he appeared last week in John's story, where he entered the locked room where they were, he appears and he points out his wounds, just like we heard last week. And what he points out is that he's flesh and bones. This appearance of Jesus is a human with flesh and bones, not a ghost. He's at great pains to tell them. And as if to prove it, he even eats a fish witch. And then he opens their minds to understand the scriptures, to understand what we call the Bible. And then he commissions them as witnesses to all nations. But what you heard here is only half the story. There's another half that comes before the story you heard today, right before. And it just wasn't assigned in our lectionary this year. And that story, that missing first half of the story, is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's the story of the two disciples walking on that day of resurrection, walking confused, maybe frightened, getting out of Dodge, walking on the road to Emmaus, and they're joined on their trail, on their path, by a stranger who asks them what they're talking about, and they tell what they have heard. They share with the stranger the crucifixion, the reports of the empty tomb, and the appearance of angels speaking to the women in their group. And the stranger explains that all they have said was foretold in the scriptures. He says, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, the stranger interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. And he shows them that it was foreordained, that what happened was foreordained. He asks them, was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory? And only when they reach the town of Emmaus, when they go into the inn and they prevail upon the stranger to stay with them, and they sit down to a meal together, and the stranger breaks bread and blesses it, only then do they realize that all the time it was Jesus walking with them. And then Jesus immediately vanishes, and the two disciples turn around and immediately go back to Jerusalem. And when they get there, we come in on the story you heard this morning. So what you have here is two instances, two accounts where Jesus opens the scriptures to them. And the scriptures that he is opening are from the prophet Hosea. That is where you find the references to the 3 days, before resurrection. Hosea prophesied to the people of Israel, the northern kingdom, a few decades before the northern kingdom was destroyed by the Assyrians. There is already a war going on with the Assyrians when Hosea is giving his prophecy. The nation is in a turmoil. It's practically a failed state. 4 kings have been assassinated in a mere 14 years. And Hosea writes, "Come, let us return to the Lord, for it is he who has torn, and he will heal us. He has struck down, and he will bind us up. After 2 days, he will revive us. And on the 3rd day, he will raise us up, that we may live before him." That's what Jesus is talking about when he unfolds these scriptures. But did you notice something? It is the people who are raised up. It's the people, not the Messiah. For it is he who has torn, and he will heal us. He has struck down, and he will bind us up. After 2 days, he will revive us. And on the 3rd day, he will raise us up. No wonder Paul writes that we have been raised with Christ. So let me say a little bit about what this means for us. You have 2 encounters with the risen Lord, 2 encounters in which he unfolds the Bible. In the first, Jesus is a mysterious stranger who vanishes like a ghost or a spirit. In the second, we have the familiar teacher in the flesh. In other words, incarnate. So we can see that Jesus is and was and still is both spirit and human. And walking with his spirit, we mortals are witnesses to all nations. We are raised up to new life, but a new life in him. Our flesh and bones are raised up, not in some spiritual way, but just as we are now. Just as we are. Wounded, broken, but raised up. We are raised up as witnesses of this new life, witnesses to this new life. And I invite you, let's show the world what we're made of. Amen.